The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the O'Malley ranch, turning the red earth beneath Catherine's boots into baked clay that cracked like broken promises. She pulled her wide-brimmed hat lower over her green eyes, squinting across the vast expanse of desert that stretched toward the Dragoon Mountains. At 22, Catherine had learned to read this land like her father read his ledger books, every shadow, every wind pattern, every sound that didn't belong. "Kate!" Her father's voice boomed across the yard, carrying the authority of a man who'd built his empire from nothing but grit and determination. Samuel O'Malley stood on the porch of their adobe ranch house, his weathered face grim beneath his gray mustache. "Get inside. Now." The urgency in his tone made Catherine's stomach tighten. She'd heard that edge before, during Apache raids, during drought years when the cattle were dying, during the territorial disputes that had claimed 3 of their neighbors' lives in the past year alone. Inside the cool darkness of their home, Samuel paced before the stone fireplace, his boots echoing against the tile floor. Maps of their territory covered the wooden table, marked with red ink that looked disturbingly like dried blood. "They hit the Morrison place last night," he said without preamble, his blue eyes hard as winter sky. "Took 30 head of cattle and burned the barn. Tom Morrison's in town now, talking about forming another militia." Catherine sank into a leather chair, her hands gripping the armrests. "Anyone hurt?" "Not this time." "But Kate..." Samuel stopped pacing and fixed his daughter with a look that had intimidated territorial governors. "I won't have you riding alone anymore, not until this ends." "Papa, I've been riding these trails since I was 12. These aren't the same Apaches we dealt with when you were 12. Samuel's voice carried years of bitter experience. "Something's changed. They're more organized, more strategic. Their raids aren't random anymore." Catherine stood, her chin lifting with the stubborn defiance that had earned her a reputation throughout Cochise County. "I won't be a prisoner in my own home because of fear." "It's not fear, it's wisdom." Samuel slammed his palm against the table, making the maps jump. "Your mother died bringing you into this world, Kate. I'll be damned if I lose you to Apache bullets." The words hung heavy in the desert air between them. Catherine felt the familiar ache that came whenever her father mentioned her mother, a woman she'd never known, but whose portrait watched over them from above the mantelpiece, green eyes identical to Catherine's own. A knock at the door interrupted the tension. Samuel's hand moved instinctively to the Colt revolver at his hip as he approached the entrance. "Who's there?" "It's Jacob, Mr. O'Malley." Samuel relaxed and opened the door to reveal Jacob Martinez, their foreman. A compact man with sun-darkened skin and intelligent brown eyes that missed nothing. Jacob had worked the O'Malley Ranch for 8 years, earning Samuel's trust through loyalty and an almost supernatural ability to predict weather patterns and cattle behavior. "Senor O'Malley," Jacob said, removing his hat respectfully, "I need to speak with you about the South Pasture." "Come in, Jacob. Kate was just leaving." Catherine bristled at the dismissal, but recognized the look in her father's eyes. This was ranch business, the kind of conversation that happened behind closed doors and involved decisions that could affect every soul on their land. "I'll be in the stables," she said, her voice carefully neutral. Outside, the heat hit her like a physical blow. The ranch bustled with activity despite the oppressive temperature, hands mending fences, tending horses, preparing for the afternoon roundup. Everyone moved with the efficiency born of necessity and the constant awareness that danger could appear on any horizon. Catherine made her way to the stables, breathing in the familiar scents of hay, leather, and horses. Her mare, Estrella, nickered softly at her approach, a beautiful paint horse with intelligent dark eyes and a white blaze down her face. "Hey, girl," Catherine murmured, stroking the horse's neck. "Looks like our adventures might be coming to an end." "That would be a shame." Catherine spun around, her heart hammering. A man stood in the shadowed entrance of the stable, tall, lean, with long black hair and skin bronzed by desert sun. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch, dark as midnight and filled with an intelligence that seemed to see straight through her. He enemy was Apache. Catherine's hand moved toward the small derringer hidden in her skirt pocket, but something in his posture stopped her. He stood with his hands visible, non-threatening, yet she sensed the coiled strength beneath his stillness, like a mountain cat that chose not to pounce. "Who are you?" she demanded, proud that her voice remained steady despite her racing pulse. "Someone who shouldn't be here," he replied in English that carried only the faintest accent, "and someone who couldn't stay away. My father would shoot me on sight. Yes, I know Samuel O'Malley's reputation." The stranger stepped deeper into the stable, and Catherine could see the details that marked him as different from the Apache raiders her father described. His clothes were a mixture of traditional and acquired, buckskin pants, a cotton shirt that had once been white, and boots that had seen hard use. A knife hung at his belt, but no firearms. "Then why are you here?" For a long moment he didn't answer. His gaze moved over her face with an intensity that made her skin flush despite the stable's shade. "I've been watching you," he said finally. "Riding across the desert like you were born to it. Free." The word hung between them, loaded with meaning Catherine wasn't sure she understood. "I have to go," she said, but her feet remained planted on the stable floor. "What's your name?" he asked. Every instinct told her not to answer. Her father's warnings, years of frontier wisdom, the common sense that had kept her alive in a land that forgave no mistakes. But something in those dark eyes made her rules seem suddenly fragile. "Catherine," she said. "Catherine O'Malley." He smiled then, a transformation that made her understand why the desert bloomed after rain. "I'm Joaquin," he said. "And Catherine O'Malley, you are nothing like I expected." Footsteps crunched on gravel outside, Jacob's voice calling her name. Catherine's eyes widened with panic. "You have to leave. Now." Joaquin nodded, but before he turned to go, he stepped closer. Close enough that she could smell sage and wood smoke on his skin, close enough to see the small scar that curved along his jawline. "I'll remember this," he said quietly. Then he was gone, slipping through the back of the stable like smoke, leaving Catherine alone with her pounding heart and the dangerous certainty that her life had just changed forever. "Miss Kate?" Jacob appeared in the doorway, his weathered face concerned. "Your father wants to see you. We've got problems." Catherine forced herself to breathe normally, to school her expression into something that wouldn't raise questions. "What kind of problems?" "The kind that means we'll be posting guards tonight," Jacob said grimly. "Apache scouts were seen near Miller's Creek this morning. They're getting closer." As Catherine followed Jacob back to the house, she couldn't shake the image of Joaquin's eyes, intelligent, determined, and completely lacking the savage cruelty her father had taught her to expect from his people. Everything she thought she knew about the world seemed suddenly uncertain, like foundation stones shifting beneath her feet. The war between their peoples had been raging for generations, fed by blood and betrayal on both sides. Her father had lost friends to Apache raids, just as she was certain Joaquin's people had lost loved ones to white settlers' bullets. But in that moment when their eyes met, Catherine had felt something she'd never experienced before: recognition. As if she'd been waiting her entire life to meet someone who understood the restless hunger that drove her to ride alone across dangerous country, seeking something she couldn't name. Inside the house, Samuel was strapping on gun belts and checking ammunition. His face had taken on the hard expression Catherine remembered from her childhood, the look of a man preparing for war. "Pack light," he told her. "We're taking you to town tomorrow. You'll stay with the Hendersons until this passes." "Papa, I won't be run off my own land." "This isn't a discussion, Kate." Samuel's voice brooked no argument. "I've already lost too much to these people. I won't lose you too." As Catherine watched her father prepare for another battle in an endless war, she thought of Joaquin's words, "Free." For the first time in her life, she understood that freedom might require choosing between love and loyalty, and that some choices could never be undone. Outside, the desert wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain, along with something else, the promise of change, dangerous and inevitable as a summer storm building over the mountains. 3 days later, Catherine found herself trapped in the suffocating propriety of Tucson's hotel parlor, listening to Mrs. Henderson's endless chatter about territorial politics and the latest fashions from San Francisco. The older woman meant well, but every word felt like another bar in an invisible cage. "Really, Catherine, you must consider visiting your aunt in Philadelphia," Mrs. Henderson was saying, her grey curls bobbing with enthusiasm. "This frontier life is no place for a young lady of your refinement. Why, just yesterday I heard that the Apache troubles are spreading." "Excuse me?" Catherine interrupted, rising so abruptly that her chair scraped against the wooden floor. "I need some air." Before Mrs. Henderson could protest, Catherine swept from the parlor and out onto Tucson's dusty main street. The town bustled with activity. Miners heading to the saloons, merchants hawking their wares, and cowboys preparing for the evening's entertainment. But even surrounded by civilization, Catherine felt more isolated than she ever had on the open range. She walked aimlessly, her boots clicking against the wooden sidewalks, until she found herself at the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to desert scrub. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded her painfully of home. "You look like a woman with troubles." Catherine turned to find a priest approaching, a man in his 50s, with kind eyes and sun-weathered skin that spoke of years spent serving frontier communities. "Father Miguel," she said, recognizing him from previous visits to town. "I didn't see you there." "I've learned to move quietly in my years here," the priest said with a gentle smile. "It helps when dealing with parishioners who would rather avoid confession." Despite her mood, Catherine found herself smiling. "I'm not avoiding confession, Father, just thinking about the troubles at home." Catherine nodded, then found herself speaking words she hadn't planned to say. "Father, what do you do when everything you've been taught to believe begins to crumble?" Father Miguel studied her face with the perceptive gaze of a man who'd counseled countless souls through life's deepest struggles. "That depends on whether the beliefs were built on truth or fear." "What if you can't tell the difference?" "Then you seek the truth for yourself," he said simply, "even if it leads you to uncomfortable places." Catherine was quiet for a long moment, watching the last light fade from the sky. "Have you ever known any Apache, Father? I mean, really known them, not just heard stories." The priest's expression grew thoughtful. "I've ministered to many people in my years here, child. Apache, Mexican, Anglo. Suffering recognizes no racial boundaries. Neither does goodness. But the raids, the violence, are real," Father Miguel acknowledged, "just as the violence committed against the Apache is real. Pain creates pain, Catherine, but it doesn't have to define us." A commotion from the main street interrupted their conversation, horses thundering into town, urgent voices calling out. Catherine and Father Miguel hurried toward the sound, joining a crowd gathering around 3 dust-covered riders. "Apache war party," one of the men was shouting. "Hit the Williams place this afternoon, burned everything, took the livestock." Catherine's blood turned to ice. The Williams ranch was only 15 miles from her father's land. "Anyone hurt?" someone called out. "Williams and his wife got away, but barely. This wasn't like the other raids. They were organized, disciplined. Someone's leading them, who knows what he's doing." The crowd erupted in angry voices, men calling for immediate retaliation, for the army to take action. Catherine pushed through the throng, her heart pounding with fear for her father and everyone at the ranch. "I have to get home," she said to Father Miguel. "Child, it's not safe. My father needs to know. They all need to know." She was turning to go when another voice cut through the chaos, calm, authoritative, and achingly familiar. "The Williams place burned because they were stealing water." The crowd fell silent, turning toward the speaker. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. Joaquin stood at the edge of the group, no longer trying to blend into shadows. In the light of the street lamps, she could see him clearly, the proud set of his shoulders, the controlled stillness that marked him as dangerous despite his calm demeanor. "You!" One of the riders pointed at Joaquin, his hand moving toward his gun. "You're Apache." "I am," Joaquin said simply. "And I'm telling you the truth about Williams." "The only truth," snarled another man, "is that your people are murdering savages." Catherine watched Joaquin's face as the insult hit him. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his dark eyes. Pain, perhaps, or resignation. "Williams diverted the creek that runs through Apache hunting grounds," Joaquin continued, as if he hadn't been interrupted. "That water has sustained my people for generations. When they went to talk, Williams shot first." "Lies." The accusation came from multiple voices now, and Catherine could feel the mood of the crowd turning ugly. Hands were moving toward weapons, faces hardening with generations of mistrust and hatred. "Enough!" Father Miguel stepped forward, his voice carrying unexpected authority. "This is not how civilized people seek truth." But Catherine barely heard the priest's words. She was staring at Joaquin, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not as the mysterious stranger who'd appeared in her stable, but as a man standing alone against an entire town's hostility, speaking truth that no one wanted to hear. Their eyes met across the crowd, and in that moment, she understood something that terrified her. She believed him. "Young man," Father Miguel was saying to Joaquin, "these are serious accusations. If what you say is true, it's not true." The shout came from Tom Morrison, the rancher whose cattle had been taken days earlier. "Father, you can't listen to this savage. They're all the same, thieves and murderers." "Are we?" Joaquin's voice remained level, but Catherine heard the steel beneath the calm. "Like the men who massacred women and children at Bear Springs. Like the soldiers who gave my people blankets infected with smallpox." The crowd's anger reached a boiling point. Men pushed forward, hands on gun handles, voices raised in threats. Catherine saw the trap closing around Joaquin and acted without thinking. "Stop!" She stepped between Joaquin and the angry crowd, her chin raised defiantly. "All of you, stop this now!" "Miss O'Malley," Morrison said, his voice gentling slightly, "get away from him. These people are dangerous." "So are we," Catherine replied, surprised by her own words. "We're all dangerous when we stop seeing each other as human beings." "Catherine," Joaquin said quietly behind her, "you don't understand what you're doing." She turned to face him, and for a moment the crowd and their hatred faded away. "I understand enough," she said. "I understand that my father taught me to judge people by their actions, not their bloodline. Your father would want you nowhere near me." "My father," Catherine said firmly, "isn't here." Adi, the crowd was stirring restlessly, unsure how to handle the daughter of one of the territory's most respected ranchers, defending an Apache warrior. Morrison stepped forward, his face flushed with anger and confusion. "Miss Catherine, your father is a good man, but you're young and don't understand the reality of these people." "The reality," interrupted a new voice, "is that this conversation needs to happen somewhere more private." Sheriff Davis pushed through the crowd, his hand resting on his gun but not drawing it. Catherine had known Davis for years, a fair man who'd earned respect from all sides of the territorial conflicts. "Son," he said to Joaquin, "you've got a lot of courage coming here, but it's not wisdom. This crowd's about 2 minutes away from doing something they'll regret." "I came to deliver a message," Joaquin said. "My chief wants to talk. About the water rights, about the raids, about finding a way to stop the killing." "Your chief?" Morrison laughed harshly. "Which one? There must be 6 different bands running wild in these mountains." "Geronimo." The name fell into the crowd like a stone into still water, creating ripples of fear and recognition. Catherine felt her own blood chill. Even she knew that name. The Apache leader whose very mention could empty saloons and send grown men reaching for their weapons. "Geronimo wants to talk?" Sheriff Davis's voice was carefully neutral. "He wants to meet with the territorial governor and with the ranchers whose land borders our hunting grounds." Joaquin's gaze found Catherine's. including Samuel O'Malley. The crowd erupted again, but Catherine barely heard the angry voices. All she could think about was her father's face when he learned that she'd stood between him and his enemies, defending the people he'd fought against for most of his adult life. "This is a trick," Morrison was saying, "a way to get our leaders in one place so they can massacre them all." "If we wanted you dead," Joaquin replied with deadly quiet, "you'd already be dead." The truth of that statement silenced the crowd more effectively than any threat could have. Everyone on the frontier knew that Apache warriors could appear and disappear like ghosts, striking when and where they chose. Sheriff Davis stepped closer to Joaquin, his voice low but carrying clearly in the desert air. "Assuming this offer is genuine, where and when?" "3 days from now, the old Spanish mission ruins near Bear Creek, dawn." "That's Apache territory," Morrison protested. "Neutral ground," Joaquin corrected. "Sacred to my people, but not claimed by any band. A place where even enemies can speak without bloodshed." Catherine found herself holding her breath. The mission ruins were 20 miles from her father's ranch, close enough to reach in a day's hard riding, remote enough that any meeting would be private. She'd ridden past the crumbling adobe walls many times, drawn by the peaceful sadness of the abandoned church. "I'll deliver the message," Sheriff Davis said finally, "but I can't guarantee anyone will come." "They'll come," Joaquin said with quiet certainty, "because the alternative is war without end." He turned to go, then paused and looked directly at Catherine. "Some choices can't be undone," he said, echoing her own thoughts from days earlier. "Make sure you're ready for the consequences of tonight." Then he melted back into the darkness, leaving Catherine standing alone in the lamplight, surrounded by hostile faces and the growing certainty that her life had just taken an irreversible turn. Father Miguel appeared at her elbow, his voice gentle but concerned. "Child, that was either very brave or very foolish." "I'm not sure there's a difference," Catherine replied, watching the crowd disperse into angry knots of conversation. As she walked back toward the hotel, Catherine knew that word of tonight would reach her father within hours. Samuel O'Malley's daughter had publicly defended an Apache warrior, had stood between their enemies and a town ready for violence. The consequences, as Joaquin had warned, were about to begin. Samuel O'Malley's rage was a living thing that filled every corner of the hotel room, making the air itself seem to vibrate with fury. Catherine had never seen her father so angry, not during the worst cattle raids, not even when drought had nearly bankrupted the ranch 3 years earlier. "You did what?" His voice was deadly quiet, the kind of calm that preceded a lightning strike. Catherine sat in the stiff back chair beside the window, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. Outside, Tucson was awakening to another scorching day. But inside the hotel room, winter had settled between father and daughter. "I prevented a lynching," she said, proud that her voice remained steady. "You defended an Apache warrior against your own people." Samuel slammed his palm against the dresser, making the wash basin jump, "in front of half the territory, in front of a mob that was about to commit murder." Samuel spun to face her, his blue eyes blazing. "Murder! Kate, these people have been murdering our neighbors for generations. They killed your grandfather, burned out the Martins, stole more cattle than we can count, and we've done the same to them." Catherine rose from her chair, matching her father's intensity. "Papa, when did we become the kind of people who shoot first and ask questions later?" "When they started shooting at us!" Samuel's voice cracked like a whip. "When they made it clear that the only language they understand is violence. Is it because last night one of them came into town, alone and unarmed, to deliver a message about peace?" Samuel's laugh was bitter and harsh. "Peace. Kate, you don't understand what you're dealing with. These aren't civilized people looking for reasonable solutions. They're savages who—" "Stop." Catherine's voice cut through her father's tirade like a blade. "Just stop, Papa. I've heard this speech my entire life, and I'm tired of it." The silence that followed was deafening. Samuel stared at his daughter as if seeing a stranger, his weathered face pale beneath his tan. "They've poisoned you," he said finally, his voice hollow. "Somehow, in the space of one conversation, they've turned you against your own family." "No one's turned me against anything," Catherine replied. "I'm just choosing to think for myself, instead of accepting hatred as inheritance." Samuel sank into the chair across from her, suddenly looking every one of his 53 years. "Your mother would be heartbroken to see this. To see you defending the people who made this territory a battlefield." The mention of her mother hit Catherine like a physical blow, but she refused to back down. "Mama would want me to be brave enough to seek truth, even when it's inconvenient." "Truth?" Samuel's voice rose again. "I'll tell you the truth, Kate. The truth is that in 3 hours I'm riding to that mission with a dozen armed men, expecting a trap that will likely get us all killed. And my own daughter has already chosen which side she's on." Catherine's heart stopped. "You're going to the meeting?" "Sheriff Davis delivered the message this morning. Every rancher in the territory will be there, along with Territorial Governor Murphy." Samuel stood and began strapping on his gun belt. "If this is genuinely an offer of peace talks, we can't ignore it. If it's a trap," he shrugged, "then at least we'll die trying to end this war." "Papa, you can't believe it's a trap. Not after what happened last night." "What happened last night," Samuel said grimly, "was that an Apache warrior got you to reveal information about our family, our defenses, our location. For all I know, you've already told him everything he needs to plan an attack on the ranch." The accusation hung in the air between them, poisonous and devastating. Catherine felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "You really believe that?" she asked quietly. "You really think I would betray our family?" Samuel's expression softened slightly, but his resolve remained firm. "I think you're young and idealistic, and you don't understand how manipulative these people can be. I think you've been charmed by a handsome face and romantic words." And I think," Catherine said, rising from her chair with quiet dignity, "that you're so blinded by old hatred that you can't see an opportunity for peace when it's standing right in front of you." She moved toward the door, but Samuel's voice stopped her. "Where are you going?" "To the mission." "Like hell you are." Samuel stepped between Catherine and the door, his hand resting on his gun. "You're staying here under guard if necessary." "You can't keep me prisoner, Papa." "I can and I will. Kate, I won't lose you to this madness." Catherine looked at her father, really looked at him, and saw something that broke her heart. Beneath the anger and the authoritarian commands, Samuel O'Malley was terrified. Terrified of losing the last piece of his beloved wife, terrified of a world changing too fast for him to understand, terrified that his daughter was slipping away from him just as everything else he'd fought to build was threatened. "Papa," she said gently, "what if they're really trying to make peace? What if this could end the killing?" "Then I'll listen," Samuel replied. "But I'll listen with my gun loaded and my men ready to fight. And if your suspicion and hostility destroy any chance of peace." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands working at his gun belt. "Then at least I'll have protected my family." A knock at the door interrupted their standoff. Samuel opened it to reveal Jacob Martinez, his face grim beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "Senor O'Malley," Jacob said, "the men are ready. We should leave soon if we want to reach the mission by dawn." "5 minutes," Samuel replied, then closed the door and turned back to Catherine. "I want you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll stay in this room until I get back. Promise me you won't try to follow us to the mission." Catherine met her father's gaze steadily. "I promise I won't do anything to endanger you or your men." It wasn't the promise Samuel had asked for, but it was the only one Catherine could give. Her father studied her face for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. "Mrs. Henderson will check on you every hour," he said, kissing her forehead. "I'll be back by evening." "Papa?" Catherine caught his arm as he moved toward the door. "Whatever happens at that mission, remember that people can change. Enemies can become allies. It's not betrayal to hope for something better." Samuel squeezed her hand gently. "I love you, Kate. Everything I do is to protect you." "I know," Catherine whispered. I love you too." After Samuel left, Catherine sat alone in the hotel room, watching the sun climb toward its zenith. Through the window, she could see the last of her father's men riding out of town, their horses kicking up dust clouds that hung in the still air like storm warnings. An hour passed, then two. Mrs. Henderson brought lunch, chattering nervously about the unusual activity in town, the tension that seemed to have infected everyone from the sheriff to the stable boys. Catherine barely touched her food, her thoughts consumed by images of her father and Joaquin facing each other across the ruins of the old mission. When Mrs. Henderson left, Catherine made her decision. She changed into her riding clothes, leather pants, cotton shirt, and boots that could handle a hard day in the saddle. Her gun belt went around her waist, the familiar weight of her Colt revolver providing comfort if not confidence. The hotel's back stairs led to an alley where Catherine had arranged for Estrella to be waiting. The paint mare nickered softly at her approach, as if sensing the importance of their mission. "We're going to do something dangerous, girl," Catherine murmured as she swung into the saddle. "And probably stupid, but it's the right thing to do." The ride to the mission took 3 hours through some of the most unforgiving country in Arizona territory. Catherine pushed Estrella hard, following game trails and old Spanish roads that wound through canyons and across mesas where the sun turned rock into furnaces. As she rode, Catherine thought about her promise to her father. She'd sworn not to endanger him or his men, and she meant to keep that vow, but she hadn't promised to stay away from the mission entirely. If the meeting was genuine, her presence might help keep peace. If it was a trap, she might be able to warn the ranchers before it was too late. The mission ruins appeared as the sun reached its peak, crumbling adobe walls rising from a small valley where cottonwood trees provided blessed shade. Catherine could see horses picketed near the trees, both the familiar brands of local ranchers and others she didn't recognize. She dismounted a quarter-mile away, tethering Estrella in a grove of mesquite where the mare would be hidden but able to graze. Then she crept closer on foot, using rocks and scrub for cover. Voices carried across the still air, her father's familiar bass, the territorial governor's nasal tone, and others she recognized from town meetings and church socials. But there were other voices too, speaking in rapid Apache and occasionally switching to English. Catherine found a position behind a fallen wall where she could see and hear without being detected. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. Her father sat across from Geronimo himself, the legendary Apache leader whose name was spoken in whispers throughout the territory. But this wasn't the savage monster of frontier legend. This was an older man, with intelligent eyes and grey threading through his long black hair, speaking in measured tones about water rights and hunting grounds. And beside him sat Joaquin, translating between English and Apache, his calm presence a bridge between two worlds that had forgotten how to trust. "The problem," Governor Murphy was saying, "is that both sides have committed acts that make trust difficult. How do we move past the violence?" Geronimo spoke in Apache, and Joaquin translated. "He says that trust must be built through actions, not words. He proposes a trial period, 6 months, where both sides respect certain boundaries and rules." "What kind of boundaries?" Samuel's voice was cautious, but not hostile. Again, Joaquin translated. "The Apache will not raid ranches that respect traditional water sources. In return, ranchers will not shoot Apache on sight, will not poison water holes, and will allow passage through ancestral hunting grounds during specific seasons." Catherine watched her father's face as he considered the proposal. She could see the conflict there, generations of hatred warring with the practical knowledge that this war was bankrupting everyone involved. "And if someone breaks these rules," asked Tom Morrison, "then the guilty party faces justice from their own people," Joaquin replied without waiting for Geronimo to speak. "Apache justice or territorial justice, depending on who commits the crime." It was a reasonable proposal, Catherine realized. More than reasonable. It was the first real chance for peace the territory had seen in decades. But she could also see the suspicion on the ranchers' faces, the way their hands stayed close to their weapons. The negotiations continued for another hour, with both sides cautiously exploring possibilities that had seemed impossible just days earlier. Catherine felt hope blooming in her chest like desert flowers after rain. Then, disaster struck. A shot rang out from the hills above the mission, not from the negotiating parties, but from somewhere in the rocks where a hidden sniper had taken position. The bullet struck the adobe wall between Geronimo and Governor Murphy, sending fragments flying. Chaos erupted. Apache warriors, who had been concealed around the ruins, materialized with weapons ready. The ranchers drew their guns, shouting accusations and threats. In seconds, the careful diplomacy dissolved into the familiar patterns of violence. "It's a trap!" Morrison yelled, his revolver already firing. "No!" Joaquin's voice rose above the gunfire as he threw himself between the two sides. "This isn't us. Someone else is shooting." "Oh, do!" But his words were lost in the battle that erupted around the mission ruins. Catherine watched in horror as months of careful planning and hope died in explosions of gunpowder and blood. She had to do something. Catherine stood up from her hiding place, knowing she was exposing herself to crossfire from multiple directions. "Stop!" she screamed at the top of her lungs. "Everyone stop shooting!" The unexpected sight of Samuel O'Malley's daughter standing in the middle of a battlefield shocked both sides into a momentary ceasefire. In that moment of stunned silence, another shot rang out from the hills, this one aimed directly at Catherine. Joaquin moved faster than thought, diving toward her as the bullet whistled past her ear. They went down together behind the fallen wall, his body covering hers as gunfire erupted again around them. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his dark eyes fierce with anger and fear. "Trying to stop a war," Catherine gasped, very aware of his weight pressing her into the sandy ground. "You're going to get killed. Then help me stop this." Above them, Samuel's voice roared across the battlefield. "Catherine, Catherine, where are you?" Joaquin's expression transformed as he realized the impossible position Catherine had put herself in. "Your father will never forgive you for this," he said quietly. "I know," Catherine replied, "but if we can save the peace talks, it might be worth it." Together, they raised their heads above the wall. The gunfire was sporadic now, both sides taking cover and trying to identify the source of the sniper shots that had triggered the violence. "There!" Catherine pointed toward a rocky outcrop where sunlight had glinted off metal. "Someone's up there!" Joaquin followed her gaze and cursed in Apache. "That's not one of ours." "And it's not one of yours either." "Then who?" The answer came in the form of more gunfire from the hills, systematic, professional shooting that seemed designed to keep both sides engaged in battle. Someone wanted this peace meeting to fail. Someone profited from the ongoing war between Apache and settlers. "Gun runners," Joaquin said grimly, "or bounty hunters. People who make money from conflict." Catherine understood immediately. As long as the Apache and the ranchers were fighting, there were fortunes to be made selling weapons, buying stolen cattle, and collecting government bounties on Apache scalps. "We have to tell them," she said. "They won't listen, not in the middle of a battle." Catherine looked across the battlefield, where her father was pinned down behind a broken wall, trading shots with Apache warriors who probably wanted peace as much as he did. This was how wars continued, through misunderstanding, manipulation, and the profits of those who benefited from bloodshed. "Yes, they will," she said with sudden determination, "if we give them something to fight together against." Before Joaquin could stop her, Catherine stood up again, this time drawing her revolver and aiming not at any of the combatants, but at the rocky outcrop where the mysterious sniper was hidden. "Listen to me!" she shouted as she fired. "All of you, we're being played!" Her shot struck rock near the sniper's position, and return fire immediately came her way. But this time, both Apache and rancher fighters could see where the bullets were coming from, and it wasn't from anyone in the mission ruins. "Someone's up in those rocks," Samuel called out. "Someone who doesn't want us talking." Geronimo spoke rapidly in Apache, and his warriors began turning their attention toward the hills. The ranchers, seeing the Apache shifting their aim away from them, began to understand what was happening. "Bounty hunters," Morrison spat. "Should have known." And what followed was perhaps the strangest battle in Arizona Territory's violent history. Apache warriors and white ranchers fighting side by side against unknown enemies who had tried to manipulate them into destroying each other. The sniper fire from the hills intensified, but now it was met by coordinated return fire from the mission ruins. Catherine found herself crouched behind the adobe wall, with Joaquin on one side and her father on the other, all three of them shooting at the same targets. "This doesn't change anything between us," Samuel said grimly to Joaquin as he reloaded his rifle. "I know," Joaquin replied, his own weapon never stopping. "But maybe it changes everything else." The battle lasted another 20 minutes before the shooting from the hills finally stopped. When Morrison and 2 Apache warriors rode up to investigate, they found 3 dead men with no identification and enough ammunition to supply a small army. "Professional killers," Morrison reported when he returned, "paid to make sure we kept fighting each other." As the dust settled and the immediate danger passed, Catherine found herself standing between 2 worlds that had been at war for generations. The peace talks could continue, but she knew that her public stand had changed everything. She was no longer just Samuel O'Malley's daughter or a witness to history. She had become a bridge between enemies, and bridges were always vulnerable to attack from both sides. Joaquin approached her as the formal negotiations prepared to resume. "You realize there's no going back now," he said quietly. "Your people will see you as a traitor. Mine will see you as an outsider. There's no safe place for someone who stands in the middle." "Lou!" Catherine looked across the mission ruins, where Apache and rancher leaders were cautiously returning to their interrupted talks. "Maybe," she said, "but there's also no other place I'd rather be." The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the adobe walls gold and red. In that light, the old mission looked less like ruins and more like a foundation, the beginning of something new being built from the remnants of something old. Whatever came next, Catherine knew that her choice was made. She would stand in the dangerous middle ground between hatred and hope, because sometimes that was the only place where peace could grow. 2 months after the mission meeting, Catherine stood on the porch of her family's ranch house, watching the sun rise over a landscape that looked the same, but felt completely different. The peace treaty hammered out in those ruins had held, but the cost of that peace was higher than anyone had anticipated. Her relationship with her father remained strained, marked by polite conversations and careful silences. Samuel spoke to her with the distant courtesy he might show a stranger, never quite meeting her eyes. The easy companionship they'd shared before was gone, replaced by something that felt like mourning. "Kate." Her father's voice came from behind her, and she turned to see him standing in the doorway, his coffee cup steaming in the cool morning air. "Good morning, Papa. Jacob says you're riding out to check the south pasture today." "Yes. The creek's running low again, and I want to make sure the cattle have enough water." Samuel nodded slowly. It was ranch business, the kind of practical concern that had always united them. But even that felt different now. "Take Martin with you," he said finally. "I know the treaty's holding, but old habits die hard." "Of course." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, both aware of all the things they weren't saying. Samuel cleared his throat. "Kate, I need you to know that what you did at the mission, it was brave, foolish, but brave." Catherine felt her throat tighten. "And what else?" "And it saved lives, both Apache and white. I can't argue with the results, even if I disagree with your methods." It was the closest thing to an apology she was likely to get from her father, and Catherine treasured it even as she recognized its limitations. "Thank you, Papa." "But Kate," Samuel continued, his voice taking on the familiar edge of paternal authority, "this thing with that Apache, It has to end. You can support the peace treaty, you can even work with them on water rights and boundaries. But whatever you think you feel for him, it can't go anywhere. You know that, don't you? Catherine met her father's gaze steadily. I know what you think, Papa, and I know what the neighbors think. But what I feel, that's something I have to decide for myself. Samuel's face darkened. Catherine, you're my daughter, and I love you. But if you persist in this madness, there will be consequences. The territorial governor himself has expressed concern about your sympathies. People are talking. Let them talk. This isn't a game. Samuel's voice rose, some of his old fire returning. Your reputation affects this entire family, this ranch, our standing in the community. You can't just throw all of that away for some romantic notion about forbidden love. I'm not throwing anything away, Catherine replied calmly. I'm choosing my own path. Before Samuel could respond, the sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Catherine shaded her eyes against the morning sun and saw 3 riders approaching the ranch house. 2 she recognized as neighbors, and 1 stranger in a dark suit who looked distinctly out of place on the frontier. "Mr. O'Malley!" called out Tom Morrison as he dismounted. "We need to talk." Samuel stepped down from the porch, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun. Catherine followed, something cold growing in her stomach. "What's the problem, Tom?" Morrison glanced nervously at Catherine, then at his companions. "Maybe we should speak privately. Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of my daughter." The stranger in the dark suit stepped forward, removing his hat to reveal thinning hair and pale eyes that seemed to catalogue everything they saw. "Mr. O'Malley, I'm Agent William Bradford from the territorial government in Phoenix. I'm here to discuss some concerns that have been raised about activities on your ranch." Catherine's blood turned to ice. She'd known this moment would come eventually, but she'd hoped for more time. "What kind of concerns?" Samuel asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Concerns about unauthorized communications with hostile Apache forces, concerns about potential intelligence being passed to enemy combatants, concerns about—" Bradford's gaze shifted to Catherine. "Divided loyalties within your household." "Now wait just a minute," Samuel began, but Bradford held up a hand. "Sir, I'm not here to make accusations. I'm here to offer solutions. The territorial government values your family's contributions to this community, and we want to help resolve this situation before it becomes more serious." "What kind of solutions?" Catherine asked, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. Bradford smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Miss O'Malley, there's a position available in the territorial capital. Administrative work, good pay, respectable housing. It would be an excellent opportunity for a young lady of your talents. A position that would take me away from the ranch." "Indefinitely, yes." Catherine understood immediately. It wasn't an offer, it was exile disguised as opportunity. Refuse and face more serious consequences. Accept and never see home again. "And if I decline this generous offer?" Bradford's smile disappeared. "Then I'm afraid more formal investigations might become necessary. Questions about treason, about collaboration with enemy forces, about activities that could be interpreted as undermining territorial security." The words hung in the desert air like a death sentence. Catherine felt her father's shock radiating beside her, felt the weight of her neighbors' stares and their judgment. "How long do I have to decide?" she asked quietly. "The stage leaves for Phoenix tomorrow morning. I'll need your answer by tonight." After Bradford and the others left, Catherine and Samuel stood alone on the porch, the silence between them heavier than desert stone. "Kate," Samuel said finally, his voice hollow, "what have you done? I've tried to choose love over hatred. I've tried to build bridges instead of walls. And look where it's gotten you." Samuel sank into one of the porch chairs, suddenly looking every one of his years. "They want to destroy you, Kate. Everything you are, everything we've built here." "I know. Then go to Phoenix. Take the position. Let this all blow over, and maybe in a few years No. Catherine's voice was quiet but firm. Papa, if I run now, I'll be running for the rest of my life. They'll always have this hold over me. What else can you do? Fight the territorial government? You can't win that battle. Catherine looked out across the desert landscape she'd called home for 22 years, thinking of all the rides across that red earth, all the sunsets she'd watched from this very porch, all the dreams she'd built around this life. Maybe I can't win, she said slowly, but maybe winning isn't the only thing that matters. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Catherine saddled Estrella and rode out toward the old mission ruins. She'd sent word through channels she'd learned to use over the past 2 months, and she knew Joaquin would be waiting. She found him sitting on a fallen wall in the same spot where they'd first taken cover together during the failed peace talks. In the fading light, he looked like part of the desert itself, timeless, enduring, beautifully dangerous. You heard, she said as she dismounted. Word travels fast in small communities. Joaquin stood and walked to her, his dark eyes searching her face. What will you do? I don't know yet. What would you do? I'm probably the wrong person to ask for advice about impossible choices. Catherine smiled despite everything. Why? Because I've been thinking about asking you to make one. The words hung between them, loaded with implications that made Catherine's heart race and her stomach clench with equal intensity. What kind of choice? Instead of answering directly, Joaquin reached into his shirt and pulled out a small object, a piece of turquoise carved into the shape of a bird, suspended on a leather cord. My grandmother made this before she died, he said quietly. She told me to give it to the woman who was brave enough to choose love over safety. Catherine stared at the necklace, understanding its significance with a clarity that made her breath catch. Joaquin, I know what I'm asking, he continued. I know what it would mean. You'd be leaving everything, your father, your ranch, your people. You'd be choosing a life that most of the world would see as a betrayal. And you'd be choosing a woman that most of your people would see as an enemy. Yes. Catherine took the necklace with trembling fingers, feeling the smooth weight of the turquoise against her palm. Where would we go? North, into Colorado Territory, maybe Montana, places where the war hasn't reached yet, where we could be just a man and woman trying to build a life together. As what? How would we live? I can ranch if someone will hire me. I can hunt, guide wagon trains, work with horses. He smiled slightly. You can do anything you set your mind to. You've already proven that. Catherine closed her fingers around the necklace, thinking of the life Joaquin was describing. It would be hard, harder than anything she'd ever attempted. They'd face prejudice, isolation, constant suspicion from all sides. There would be no family support, no community acceptance, no safety net beyond what they could create for themselves. But there would also be freedom. The freedom to love without apology, to build something new from nothing, to prove that the barriers between their peoples weren't as insurmountable as everyone believed. When would we leave? She asked quietly. Tomorrow night, after the stage to Phoenix has already gone. By the time they realize you didn't take their offer, we'll be 2 days into the mountains. Catherine looked back toward her family's ranch, invisible in the gathering darkness, but present in every memory she carried. 22 years of her life were rooted in that red earth, in the adobe walls, where her father still waited for her return. I need to think, she said finally. I know. But Catherine... Joaquin stepped closer, his hands framing her face with infinite gentleness. Whatever you decide, know that asking you to choose was the hardest thing I've ever done. I love you enough to let you walk away if that's what's best for you. And I love you enough to consider walking away from everything I've ever known. He kissed her then, soft and desperate, and full of all the words they didn't have time to say. When they broke apart, Catherine could taste salt and realized she was crying. Tomorrow night, she whispered. Give me until tomorrow night. Catherine rode home through darkness that felt different from any she'd experienced before. Every familiar landmark, the creek where she'd learned to swim, The mesa where she'd first learned to shoot, the cottonwood grove where her mother was buried, seemed to be saying goodbye. At the ranch house, she found her father waiting on the porch, his face drawn with worry and exhaustion. "Kate," he said as she dismounted, "we need to talk." "I know, Papa." Inside, Samuel poured himself a whiskey and offered her one. Catherine accepted it, needing the burn of alcohol to steady her nerves for what was coming. "I've been thinking about what Bradford said today," Samuel began, settling into his chair by the fireplace. "And I've been thinking about everything that's led us to this point. Papa, let me finish." Samuel held up a hand, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "I've been angry with you for months, Kate. Angry and disappointed and scared out of my mind. I thought you were throwing your life away for some romantic foolishness." Catherine remained silent, letting her father work through thoughts he'd obviously been wrestling with. "But tonight, sitting here alone, I started thinking about your mother." Samuel's voice grew soft with memory. "Do you know why I fell in love with her?" "No, Papa, you never talk about her. Because she saw the world differently than anyone else I'd ever met. Because she was brave enough to question things that everyone else just accepted. Because she chose love over convenience, even when it was dangerous." Catherine felt tears threatening again. "What are you saying?" Samuel stood and walked to the mantelpiece, his fingers tracing the frame of her mother's portrait. "I'm saying that maybe I've been so afraid of losing you that I forgot what made you worth having in the first place." "Papa." "Kate, if you take that position in Phoenix, you'll be safe. You'll have a respectable life, and maybe eventually all this will be forgotten." Samuel turned to face her, his expression infinitely sad. "But you'll also be living someone else's life, not your own. And if I don't take it, then you'll have to find another way. And whatever that way is," Samuel's voice broke slightly, "I want you to know that you have my blessing." Catherine stared at her father, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Even if that way involves Joaquin." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands working at his glass. "I may never understand it, Kate, and I may never stop worrying about you, but I'd rather have a daughter who follows her heart than one who lives in fear." Catherine set down her whiskey and crossed to her father, wrapping her arms around him in a fierce embrace. "I love you, Papa. No matter what happens, no matter what I choose, that will never change." "I know, sweetheart, I know." They held each other in the firelight, both aware that this might be goodbye, both trying to memorize the moment for whatever lonely nights lay ahead. The next evening, as the sun painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Catherine O'Malley made her choice. She packed light, clothes that could handle hard travel, her mother's jewelry, the deed to her portion of the ranch, and enough money to last several months. On her father's desk, she left a letter explaining her decision and her destination, along with legal documents transferring her inheritance to Samuel. At the stable, she saddled Estrella one last time, whispering apologies and promises to the paint mare who had been her companion through so many adventures. "Where we're going, girl, we'll need to be even braver than we've ever been before." The ride to the mission ruins took an hour through country that looked different in the twilight, softer somehow, more forgiving. When she arrived, Joaquin was waiting with 2 horses and supplies for a long journey. "You came," he said, and she could hear the relief in his voice. "I came," Catherine confirmed, dismounting and transferring her gear to one of his pack horses. "Are you ready for this? Really ready? Are you?" Catherine looked back toward the ranch one last time, then at the man who'd changed everything simply by seeing her as she truly was. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." They rode north through the night, following old trails that wound through canyons and across mesas where few people ever traveled. Behind them, the lights of civilization grew smaller and finally disappeared entirely, leaving them alone with the stars and the vast promise of an uncertain future. As dawn broke over the mountains of Colorado Territory, Catherine and Joaquin made camp beside a stream that had no name, in a valley that belonged to no government. They were tired, saddle-sore, and facing challenges that would have broken weaker people. but they were also free. "Any regrets?" Joaquin asked as they shared coffee and hardtack in the morning light. Catherine considered the question seriously, thinking of her father eating breakfast alone at the ranch, of the community that would judge her choice, of the safe life she'd abandoned. "None," she said finally. "Not one." Joaquin smiled and pulled her close, and Catherine knew that whatever lay ahead, whether success or failure, acceptance or exile, they would face it together. Love, she had learned, was not about choosing the easy path. It was about choosing the path that led to truth, no matter how difficult the journey. In the distance, a hawk circled in the bright morning sky, riding thermals toward destinations only it could see. Catherine watched its flight and understood that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was trust the wind to carry you towards something better, even when you couldn't see where you were going. The war between their peoples continued in Arizona territory, but here in this unnamed valley, peace had already begun.